in India, we are all having a lot of problem related to COVID, and now biggest problem for all the parents is they're going to send the kids to the school, and how what are the precautions we need to take, and what are the issues in children we are facing. We have a very specialist in this area, Dr. Deepthi Varat. She's assistant professor of pediatric hemato-oncology department in Mayo Clinic in Minnesota. And I don't want to waste the time much here. I straightly go to the questions and let her enlighten with a lot of knowledge what they've gained in the last 2-3 months in the COVID time, and what the new things they're seeing in the COVID related issues. And I'm handing over the whole thing to Dr. Deepthi. Deepthi, can you just tell us more about, do you want to tell more about you? Because I just give a small intro. It won't be adequate for sure. Can I give you a little more extra things about what you do and where do you come from? Little introduction about you.
Thank you, Dr. Ram, for inviting me for this discussion on COVID and with a focus in children. It is my pleasure to talk to everyone. A little bit about me would be that I originally come from the state of Maharashtra, Solapur specifically. I did my medical college there, and then I did my pediatrics training in Chicago. And after that, I moved to Rochester, Minnesota, Mayo Clinic to train as a pediatric hematologist oncologist. I am also trained in coagulation, so bleeding and clotting disorders, especially from a laboratory standpoint. And then I have been practicing at Mayo Clinic for the past 5 years as on staff. So I do have quite a bit of experience in pediatrics, especially in blood-related disorders, cancer disorders. And now with the emerging COVID infection in children, there is a lot of new information that's coming out, and I think this is a good time point to discuss about these issues.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dr. Deepthi. And see, earlier days, I remember when the COVID is emerging in the UK, government has instructed the parents, you need not restrict the kids. They can go and, meet the friends, and it's not a big issue. The initial days, even there a lot of relaxation given to the kids, because considering the psychological issues they're going to face in the future if they lock down the kids. But later date, they found that even the kids are getting affected. So what is your opinion on, what is the scenario, what you're seeing in the kids? Is they really getting affected, and what is you can enlighten us more about the kids and the COVID?
Yes, you are exactly right. In the beginning, it was a general perception that children were not being affected by COVID, and they were otherwise seeming to do fine. And in fact, that is why earlier on, there weren't much instruction or restrictions on children going to schools or daycares, and children were being allowed to go and attend. But this is a very unique scenario in the history, at least in the recent history of mankind, where we are being faced to see an evolving situation of a serious infectious nature. And more evidence is emerging every single day. Therefore, the recommendations and the guidelines are changing every single day. Earlier on, when the pandemic actually started spreading from around January of 2020, for not only in China, but through other parts of the world, we started seeing more and more different manifestations, mostly in the adults. Even until about April or so, there wasn't much evidence about transmission in children. Also because testing was not widely available. So if you don't test, you don't find, and you don't understand how the disease behaves. The more and more testing started being available, not only for adults, but also for children, we started finding out that children were also being affected, although they don't manifest the same symptoms like adults. Almost 90% of the children may have no symptoms or very mild symptoms, just mild fever or body aches or things like that, which can be easily missed for any other childhood illness. So we don't know how many of the children were even affected early on. And therefore, slowly, the authorities and people started realizing that children are not just innocent bystanders. They cannot express manifest any symptoms, but they can be carriers and transmitters. Therefore, it started becoming important to see how do children react to this infection, and therefore the guidelines also started changing over time.
Oh, cool. So as you said, it's very, like even you can easily miss the symptoms what we are seeing in the children. Uh, what is the major difference what you're seeing the symptoms in children compared to the adults? Because adults, we know sore throat, fever, body pain, and even the loss of smell, loss of sensation. A lot of new symptoms are emerging, but still we have an idea. What exactly the pediatric presentation and how is it different from the adult manifestations of this disease?
The manifestations in children are similar, as in they also have fevers, they can also have cough, they can also have shortness of breath, but they are much milder. But the biggest difference is many of the children have no symptoms, although they may harbor the virus. So that is the biggest problem, because if your child is otherwise looking fine, you don't feel the need of going and testing them. But the unique part about children is the severity can change. And the way the severe disease in children manifests is very different from severe disease in adults. And this new syndrome, or a constellation of symptoms that has been emerging now, especially since mid-April or so, there weren't any case reports, but then this rare syndrome called as pediatric multi-inflammatory syndrome, or multi-system inflammatory syndrome, has been reported in many parts of United States and Europe. Also because these are the areas that were largely affected until recently, and have been in the top 10 of the countries that have been affected. Therefore, the evidence has been emerging more in these regions of the world. And this is a very severe form of the disease that happens in children. It cannot be predicted which child may develop this or not. Fortunately, it's very rare. So if you look at COVID in general, most of the severe illness is in older adults, age 50 or above, especially 65 and above. And the earlier evidence was people under 20 years of age were not being affected that much. But that is not totally true. If you look at the a spectrum of COVID patients, 1 to 2% of the cases are in less than 18-year-old people, so children. So it is rare. But amongst that, the children who get sicker are only about 1 to 2% that require any ICU type of care. The difference in that with the multi-system inflammatory syndrome is that it doesn't necessarily happen in that population. So a child may have had COVID infection in the recent past and may not have the test, the PCR or the active disease test positive, and can develop this few days later, weeks later. So then there is a temporal association in timeline with COVID, but you cannot necessarily predict which child will develop this severe syndrome. What these children usually present as is severe abdominal pain, persistent fevers, so high fevers, 39 degrees Celsius or higher for 4 days or more, rashes on the body, redness of the eyes, peeling of the hands or skin, which is similar to another syndrome that we know exists in children called as Kawasaki disease, but it's not exactly the same. So it's similar in the way it presents, but it's not exactly the same. And these children can be very, very sick.
Okay, if you mean to say the children, what age group, can you specify the age group? Do you see the Kawasaki disease kind of a disease in the children in the COVID related time?
Right. And that is a very important point that you are making, that the age group is also different. So when we know about Kawasaki syndrome that exists in children, usually we see in younger age, less than 5 years of age, but that's not necessarily true for COVID related. So it appears similar, but it's not exactly in the youngest children. It can happen in older children as well. The problem with this syndrome is also similar to Kawasaki, as in it affects your blood vessels and particularly your heart, your coronary arteries, and can cause organ damage and can cause heart failure. And that is why it can also be fatal. So it is very important for parents to keep an eye on such symptoms and get in touch with their doctors immediately if you see that a child is having persistent high fevers and rash on the body, redness of the eyes, redness of the lips or swelling, peelings of the hand and feet, the skin peeling, those kind of things. So it is something that parents have to be vigilant. Fortunately, it's very, very rare. Only about 100 or so cases have been reported so far in United States. So it's not very common. And usually if these children are identified sooner, get treatment sooner, they recover as well. So that is a good thing.
Any risk population or risk factors or any vulnerable populations where this, like kids get affected? It's like that this kind of a people will easily get affected. Can you specify something like that, or there is no the vulnerable group?
So for there are vulnerable, populations that we know, especially from adults. We know, obesity is a risk factor. So if your BMI is 30 or higher, if you have pre-existing chronic conditions like diabetes or heart disease, those people are more at risk of developing severe disease and may end up in the ICU. Even the mortality rate is higher. African American race, Native American people are known to have higher severity of the disease. But in children, especially for this multi-system inflammatory syndrome, there is no specific risk population that we know of. Again, we have to keep in mind that COVID is something that's just happening in front of our eyes. Because there are so few numbers, we may not have enough evidence to say that this certain population is more at risk or not in children. But from a COVID severity standpoint in children, not specifically for the multi-system inflammatory, but COVID infection in general in children, again we see similar patterns. Kids with obesity, kids with asthma or pre-existing lung disease are known to again have more severe disease and can have more problems, but not specifically the Kawasaki-like syndrome.
Like that the diagnosis is by doing the PCR test and trying to find out the reason for this disease. But as you said, that disease is going to happen earlier, but they are going to present later. So how will you say that this is because of the COVID or some other new things are emerging at the same time?
Right. So I think the point where I need to clarify is that some of the kids with this multi-system inflammatory syndrome have been tested positive,
Okay.
but some of them test negative for active disease, but may test for recent past infection. So in COVID, there are two different types of tests. One is the PCR, polymerase chain reaction test, which looks for the identification or detection of the RNA of the virus. So that means that the virus is actively replicating in your body and causing active infection. That is to, again, identify someone, does he or she have the infection or not. But the other type of tests are the serological tests or the antibody detection tests. That test is specifically looking for, have you had the infection in the recent past? And there are different types of tests in that too, to look for IgM or recent infection. IgG is few weeks ago. So you have now recovered completely from the COVID infection and have now protective antibodies that we can detect by this test. So the multisystem inflammatory syndrome can happen in either stage. So you can be PCR positive or negative. You can be antibody positive or negative. But there seems to be a temporal association for sure, as in you have the COVID infection actively or sometime in the past.
Okay. So, see, we talk about this inflammatory disease in the children, and do we have any protocol for diagnosing the disease? I know the symptoms are the main thing, but still,
Right.
do you have any other investigatory things you want the doctors to do this here? Or, and what are the treatment modalities available at this stage for this disease?
Right. So, the signs and symptoms are very important. That is the first thing to identify and seek medical help early on. And from then, the most of the investigations are similar to what you would do for Kawasaki syndrome. So, usually for Kawasaki, we look for cardiac troponins, we do echocardiogram, and look for coronary artery inflammation and any cardiac dysfunction. Based on that, treatment is usually similar again to Kawasaki, as in aspirin and IVIG or intravenous immunoglobulin. These treatment therapies have helped in COVID related multisystem inflammatory syndrome as well. So the treatments have been similar so far and seem to work in both cases. In COVID, the other type of immunoglobulins is the convalescent plasma, can also be used, which is the antibodies basically gathered from individuals that have had COVID infections in the past, now recovered, now they have these protective antibodies, and we collect them and then infuse them in the patients with active infection or inflammation.
So what I understand is the you as usual that you see the cardiac status and the coronary vessel status, and then you go with the aspirin and the immunoglobulins, intravenous immunoglobulins, and finally, what you said, I missed that point. Last one,
The convalescent plasma. Yes.
convalescent plasma. So these are all the
Convalescent
things. Yeah.
plasma, yeah, it is more specific because we are only giving the antibodies that we know are from people who have had COVID. Therefore, they're very specific to the SARS-CoV-2 virus. And as opposed to IVIG is just pooled plasma from otherwise healthy donors, and that has wide spectrum variety of antibodies which can be non-specific. We know that that works in Kawasaki for sure, which is why that has been tried in COVID related multi-system inflammatory syndrome. The whole idea is to subdue the inflammation, because the underlying problem is the hyperactive immune response that happens, that the immune response, which usually should be protective for your body to act against any foreign antigens or bacteria, viruses and whatnot, is now out of hand and is actually causing more damage to your body than protecting from these foreign attacks. And to subdue that inflammation, to calm the immune reaction and help your body recover. So that is the whole idea of giving the immunoglobulins.
I got the point. So that inflammation affecting the lungs in the adults and the heart in the kids. That's a simple way to.
Mostly. Not that they're mutually exclusive. We know that kids can also develop severe lung infections and all that. But the multisystem inflammatory syndrome, the Kawasaki-like, is not usually seen in adults. So you don't see that in adults. Very unique for children.
Okay. So we know that this is going to be the next like couple of years. We don't know when it's going to be over. The social distancing and hand washing and all those things we are going to follow. We don't know how long. Do you have any kind of what is your opinion about how long this problem is going to exist and when are we going to come out of it? This is not only me, even you, in everybody's mind. This is going to be
Yes.
that what is the question is going around. Can you just tell your opinion about it?
So the simple answer for that is we don't decide, the virus decides. Until we equip ourselves to defend ourselves from this virus. The virus will dictate what we do, how we live our life. Therefore, until we develop something that can defend ourselves, specifically what I'm trying to allude to is effective vaccine against the virus, we will have to modify our life to adjust and to be able to live and adapt to, a lifestyle which will decrease our chances of getting the virus. So yeah, until then, and so if we are looking at vaccines, then is how long does it take for a vaccine to be out in the market and to be given to general population? Usually that takes decades. And again, COVID gives us a very unique perspective, at least for this generation of people, is to see science in evolution. It's a very if someone looks at it just from an intellectual standpoint, how does medical science work? How do scientists identify and then create strategies to mitigate any infectious agent? This is a very nice time point to see how things evolve. So nothing is set in stone right now. There are many vaccine trials in place in all different parts of the world. Some are showing promise. And again, if we look at how vaccines are developed, many of these vaccine trials have been accelerated. So many of the vaccines have skipped the animal testing stage and have gone directly to human trials, showing promise early on in phase 1 trials. And when we will then be able to ramp up any vaccine that is showing promise, and if the people are getting vaccinated, only then we can imagine on going back to normal as we were living back in 2019.
I know. See, one more thing. In India, we are trying a lot of other things. Like we have a lot of other allied medical things like homeopathy and the Ayurveda and Siddha. A lot of other medicines. All other specialties are equally. They are also trying their best. And the other thing is yoga. Like the pranayama. The problem is the inflammation. Okay, we all agree that problem is hyper acute inflammatory reaction. So the yoga, especially the breathing techniques like pranayama, they claim it's basically to calm your body and balancing your body. Okay, so
Right.
basically they say the right and left side brain, one is a male kind of thing, other side is a female kind of thing. So basically balancing the male and female energy. Okay, so those kind of a pranayama is, like even Deepak Chopra, he's doing a lot of studies in US, saying how that inflammatory mediators are balancing, and like he proved scientifically also how the yoga helps in controlling the inflammation. Okay, so we are all advising all our population to do the pranayama regularly. And one more interesting thing is so there's a homeopathy drug called Arsenica alba, if I'm not wrong. It's Arsenica alba 30. Okay, this one, even the Central Institute of Homeopathy in India, they found out that it's quite effective in prophylaxis as well as for treating the symptoms to the extent. We had to do a lot of research in this field, but since we don't know anything about it, we don't know when the vaccine is going to come. It's nothing wrong in trying these things in children also. That's what we do using the homeopathy and some like native medicines like all turmeric and whatever people say people are using here in India. That's what happening. Hopefully sometimes this also works, that also works. Whatever works, the patient has to the community has to be benefited out of it. And the last 2 months in the India, the lockdown, a lot of places are locked down. Day yesterday, I spoke about the psychological aspect of the adolescents and the kids, what all the things they're going through, the mental issues, what all the things happening because of the lockdown. And there is a huge response from the audience and a lot of views from the YouTube. I'm not a specialist, but since we run a school, I used to read a lot of books about the adolescents. So that knowledge I spoke, but a lot of people liked it. The same way, the last 2 months, because of the adolescents issue, a lot of mental stress to the parents as well as for the kids. Okay, since you're a pediatrician, basically you're a pediatrician, can you say more about the mental issues and the psychological distress what the kids are going through now, how to handle it?
Yeah, this is a big issue because, children understand quite a bit. We don't give them enough credit about how much they actually understand, process, all that's going around them. The best way to handle the situation is to be open communication, and allowing them to ask any questions that are happening in their mind, so that we help them get more information. Obviously, for each different age group it will be different depending on the child's understanding, to simplify, to make them understand what's going around them, but also taking the scare factor out of it, because the more things are unknown, the more questions remain unanswered, the more fear and anxiety develops. If the children feel like there is someone they can talk to, someone who will be able to make them understand what is going around them, and focusing on how to help themselves, how to help people around them, how to help the situation in general, focusing on that rather than focusing on the problem, that also helps a lot. um, Children are in general very much wanting to get involved in being part of the solution rather than being part of the problem, understanding why hand washing is important, understanding why wearing a face mask is important. But talking more communication, and allowing them to feel like they are free to ask any questions. um, the other thing is also, because they have to stay at home, they cannot meet uh, people that they otherwise would be able to go meet, their friends or family members, allowing them to call them, video chats and things like that, activities that will help them focus on their creativity, and helping them taking mental breaks from all that's happening. Because the other problem is no one is able to get a mental break from this, because whether you think about it or not, COVID is there. It's not going away. Especially with news channels and everything, it's always on, it's always something or the other, and it's usually bad news associated with COVID. Taking breaks from that also helps, not just children. I think even adults might benefit from that, and focusing on something creative and productive helps them a lot.
Yes. So even some of the actors are giving a small talk. They're giving a very good message. See, instead of watching a TV, you can get the message from either like a news from the mobile devices, or something will calm your mind. Like the news channels, they want the breaking news. They want that like that music and background thing. It like increases our heart rate so much. So better to read the news once in a while, even if you just like subscribe for the breaking news. Once in a while it pops up, we know the news and just post down and like come out. At the same time, seeing initial days in India, everybody are fascinated to see what is the count today, what is the count today, what is the count in my city. Like now nobody look at it because it's skyrocketing and nobody wants to know about it because no point in that. Like this is how happening now. Nobody knows what to do in the future. Even doctors can't guide much now. Whether the schools to reopen or not, even the government is not very clear. Each and every day they are changing the rules and regulations because government also confused like us. It's very difficult for, we can't blame the government also. They also in a lot of stress. We have to support them. So now the schools are going to open, exams are going, they're planning to conduct the exams. So what is your advice for the kids and the parents for sending the kids for the exams or the for the schools? What is your advice for the parents and the kids?
So for schools, the CDC and WHO have put out very good guidelines, which are very useful, and they base it on the risk of transmission that's happening in that particular community or that school district. If whether it's low or no transmission, or minimal to moderate or high risk of transmission, and the adaptive guidelines are different. In general, though, it's all, the basic principle is to avoid people to people contact. Where possible, to do teleschool or online classes, things like that. If not possible, then when the schools open, they need to again adapt to social distancing principles, as in children should be 1 meter apart as much as possible. And again, this is more, the older children will be able to do it better than the younger ones. So trying to uh, help them understand, again, hand washing, so providing them with breaks to, so that they can wash their hands regularly, or alcohol based hand sanitizers, masks, changing the school schedule so that not all children come at the same time, dividing them into morning classes or afternoon classes, so that some teachers and children can come in the morning, some teachers and children can come in the afternoon or evening. um, and even school breaks, so that the children are given, say, 10 to 15 minutes of break for certain kids, and then after that the other set of kids. So if you're not able to do it in space, do it in time, but in general staggering, so that the human to human contact is less. So that there are definitely guidelines for that, but many schools, I'm sure, are not able to follow those guidelines exactly what they have been given. So some of the schools, for example, here in US, are allowing them to graduate from one class to the next without having examinations, especially say for kindergarten or things like that, where it really does not matter so much, at least for this year. And then hopefully by next year, when we may have effective vaccines, then things can go back to normal.
Okay. Even one of our live programs in Insta, the company told me that one interesting thing, like one of the school, they organize the Zumba classes for the class. Like, even they're not meeting each other, they're not meeting their friends, and they get bored at home, so they conduct a Zumba class, so that every friend knows he's dancing like this, he's dancing like that. Like, it's like a classroom ambience, but so to at least like the kids get motivated. And the other thing, what I always wonder, they're going for the exam, they're going to give the answer sheets or the extra sheets or whatever, how the Indian system works here. So even the papers are in risk of the like spreading the disease. So obviously when they are going inside the room, they have to clean the hands with alcohol, right? So before getting each the additional papers or something, they have to clean this kind of a thinking process has to be put in each and every person's mind, then only it works. Because we, even doctors, we don't follow those things very vigorously earlier days. We know things, but we don't do it because everything has a solution. Now we don't have a solution, we started following it. So even making the doctor understand these things are difficult, how to make a public understand these things and implementing things, something is really really a tough part in India especially. So we have to face those things. And then uh, these are all the pediatric age group we are going to deal with. These are all the issues we normally see. But when coming to our practice, okay, what are the see, you're in Mayo Clinic. I know I want to get some more clarity to because I haven't started my practice, because mine is cosmetic, which I don't want to rush, but still I don't want to sit idle for a long time. We don't know the solution for this. How long you'll sit idle like this? And even other elective surgeries like orthopedic and like ophthalmological surgeries and a lot of other things they started doing, but there is no clarity how to follow, what to follow. Can you give us some guidelines what is followed in your institute, and so that we also try to implement those things here?
Right. Yeah, there is a lot. Every business, including healthcare industry, has to adapt to this. For many businesses, it was just okay to just stop uh, their shop or their restaurant or whatever they had. But for medical personnel, a hospital or a clinic, it is very hard to just shut shop and say, we're not going to practice anymore. So the rule, again, the mantra is to adapt. And so early on, back when the shutdown was announced, the guidance from CDC was to stop all elective surgeries, even knowing that COVID was at least primarily a respiratory illness. Therefore, with the respiratory support you need when a patient is undergoing surgery, needs anesthesia and all that. So the entire OR is affected. All your equipments can get contaminated. So how do you handle all of that? The key change that happened was availability of tests. So now, since mid-May, the hospitals have been allowed to conduct elective surgeries. But the rule that we have followed in our institution is to test every patient who is going to undergo anesthesia within 72 hours to test them whether they're positive or negative. And that determines their eligibility to be able to undergo any elective procedures. Now, emergent procedures are a different story. If they are emergency, they need it, they will have to undergo a procedure. But for elective surgery, so that business starts to come back to normal, people who have, say, other problems like cancer or whatever, they need surgeries for their different diagnosis. Care shouldn't stop for those people. Cancer doesn't stop just because COVID is there, um, or any other problem. Therefore, how do we take care of those people while we are also dealing with COVID? So testing was the main thing, where we test patients every weekly if they are undergoing active treatment, so chemotherapy, for example. But if they need surgical procedures within the last 72 hours, they should have a negative test. But retesting again, if they need another procedure or they need more chemotherapy, radiation, things like that, they need to be tested over and over and over. So the testing is becoming the most important thing. The hospitals functioning in general, they have adapted, as in only patients who need active care are being allowed to come. Elective care, they're encouraging more and more to do telemedicine. So, video visits. When we have been doing a lot of that, so that patients can get care from the comfort of their own home. If patients do come to the clinic, they are trying to limit how many people accompany them, so family members or other visitors. So allowing only one person as much as possible. With kids, you have to have 1 to 2, so 2 parents maybe sometimes, but allowing one of them to stay in the waiting area, one parent in the room with the patient when they're in the clinic visit. Every person that walks through the door is screened with checking their vitals, getting recent history, and then every person is made to wear mask, whether you're symptomatic or not. So universal face masks.
Is it a normal mask or any specific that N95 or something you are insist for all the patients also?
So N95 masks are being used because, again, there is so much shortage that we need to restrict them for the medical professions who need them absolutely for high aerosolized procedures. So, for example, intubation, bronchial lavage, or things like that, or patients, on ventilator care, and those medical professionals who take care of patients with respiratory illness. So those are the situations where the N95 masks are being selectively used. Otherwise, for general use, we encourage people to use even cloth masks. A mask is better than nothing, because so the transmission risk is highest when, if 2 people are interacting, if neither of them have a mask, a regular cloth or regular surgical or a procedure mask. Highest transmission when no one is wearing mask. If one person is wearing a mask, another one is not, that's moderate risk of transmission. If both are wearing the mask, then it's a low risk of transmission. So knowing that, with the everyone wearing a mask, everyone washing their hands or cleaning their hands with the hand sanitizer, it is okay to use a regular mask, and that's fine.
So, so basically, they are restricting the patients, inpatient, the outpatients, but trying to do a lot of telemedicine things. That's very important. People not understanding. They even for the cosmetics, the follow-ups, we tell them don't come, but they say that no, doc, I want to meet you in person. They're not understanding the seriousness of the situation. Even they asking
Right.
for the cosmetic procedures at this stage. I wonder why you guys want to get into trouble. Just be at home. They don't listen. That's the problem. And other things, what I understand is asking them to use the mask. The major problem what we face in India is the Indian government is restricting the investigations now a lot of, because the private labs are allowed to do it now, but the government is giving a lot of pressures not to do more tests. You know, like it's little funny, but they don't want to show the values high for the particular the city or a state. So they are restricting the labs not to perform the test. They are not considering the risk factor for the doctors. See, when the elective procedure, if I want to do, unless otherwise the patient getting the PCR test done, how will I be safe? Even I taking, they're telling that pregnancies you should not do you should not insist the patient to go for a test. Why should that obstetrician take the risk? We don't, and these are all the things the government is not understanding. So you know, Maharashtra and Chennai both are in the peak, the curve, and so here it's almost community spread is everywhere. It is worse, and even my understanding is in 1,000, 2,000 cases every day getting affected in a city like Chennai and Bombay. So, so in this government has to give importance to the doctors and doctors' safety. They forget about those things. They are worrying about other political scenarios. It's not that way. They're not understanding. The viral load is going to be very high in the theaters where we do surgeries, where the laminar flow is there. It tends to increase the viral load. They don't understand those things. A lot of funny things happen. One doctor used to do the test for everybody, the theater person and the doctor, the attendants, patient, everybody. He does two surgeries. Third surgeries, the patient and attendants are negative, and all the theater staffs and the doctor is positive. So you know, like it's very difficult to understand how the COVID is reacting, but still, this should be followed to safeguard the doctor. The government has to understand this. So
Yes,
coming
I
to the
totally
other,
agree with you on
yeah,
that.
yeah.
Yeah.
The what is the
And
clinical? Yeah, yeah. Come on, Deepti.
yeah, so again, you made a very good point that testing is so important. I think the availability of tests and performing tests is universally underreported, under tested and underreported. So even though the numbers are horrible, the more you test, the more you find. But I think in every country that has reported so far, the numbers are underreported for sure.
Correct.
So I don't think that the problem is restricted only to India. Many of the countries, even the way they define the risks and COVID associated death, the way they define also affects the numbers that are reported. So underreporting is a very big problem everywhere.
Yeah. Next, we have to come to the main things. What are the clinical trials happening, and what we talked about the vaccine development. You spoke about it. What are the clinical trials going on at this stage, and when will the results are expected in your area? Can you just give us some more information about it?
Yeah. So there are hundreds of clinical trials happening right now all over the world, looking at different modalities of treatment, including immune modulators. But what people are interested in is curative therapy, right? So far, there hasn't been a single agent that has been identified as curative. But two important trials I think are important for us to understand right now is one is the remdesivir clinical trial that has shown early promise, not in curative, but shortens the duration of severity. So early recovery times when remdesivir is used early on in these patients and decreasing mortality because decreased severity of the disease. And the other important trial was the hydroxychloroquine, which showed the higher mortality in patients that were that were given hydroxychloroquine. And so more risks than benefits. So it did not show any benefit, but higher risk of mortality with hydroxychloroquine. And the hydroxychloroquine azithromycin combination also showed higher mortality. So very important, because these drugs have been so much in the news, and every layperson must have heard, remdesivir, hydroxychloroquine at some point, because they're so much bombarded with the information in the news media. So people to understand that, hydroxychloroquine is really not the answer, which was thought early on maybe it would help because of its immunomodulatory, anti-inflammatory properties. Not so true in COVID for sure, but the remdesivir trials seem to have helped with some promise. Still, there is no cure as such. It will be nice to have a cure. Some of the combination therapy, like antiretroviral, so HIV like therapy, where they use combination of 2-3 different antiviral medications, maybe that might also provide some promising answers. These are all again treatment options, looking for curative options. That is not going to help us to come back to normal. The real answer is the vaccine. So until we have an effective vaccine that we employ and creative, the point is to create artificial herd immunity, bypassing an active infection. There are two ways to get herd immunity. One is to get the infection and develop antibodies, or to avoid all of that and get the vaccine and develop the active immunity and therefore avoid infection. So that will be the main thing, to look for ways to get back to normal, ways to get back.
Even if the vaccine comes, it's going to be the flu vaccine kind of. No, yearly you have to go for the vaccination, right? If I'm not wrong.
So, there would be those kind of vaccines which would, so usually flu vaccine you look for is the either live attenuated vaccine against certain strains. So those are under trial as well, but there are DNA based vaccines, and there is the mRNA based vaccine where the mRNA is incorporated into the genome so that we then develop antibodies actively. Those have shown to have sustained immune response in early trials. So there are different newer modalities of vaccines as well. So we don't know which one is going to show promise in the future. We may have a better vaccine than what they have, these seasonal, yearly influenza vaccines. Maybe we'll have a better vaccine that will not need it to be renewed every year, like the flu vaccine, and need to vaccinate every single year. Who knows? I mean, that might be also an answer, as in we would need probably 1 or 2 doses and we should be good. And that would be the ideal way to do it.
Okay. So hydroxychloroquine, you said that mortality is high. A lot of mixed WhatsApp messages and a lot of things are coming. So they say that it's high, but I want to know whether is it when we are using for the prophylaxis they found there is some kind of a mortality, or when the disease already sets in, when they use the hydroxychloroquine they saw the mortality more that time.
Therapeutic trials for sure.
Therapeutic trials.
Yes. Yeah. There is no role for prophylaxis yet. Again, we don't know if that it prevents the infection from happening at all. But definitely from a treatment standpoint, it doesn't seem to be helping.
Okay. Because even your president is taking hydroxychloroquine.
Well, yes, that is the news for sure.
So even the public don't want to stay. They fear people. They want to do something for that. So when the president is taking, why can't we try that? See, for the prophylaxis, when they take any risk factors, unless they say, I know that there is some contraindication where there are ACE inhibitors, you need to consult your physician before taking the hydroxychloroquine. Do you feel that any other restrictions for the prophylaxis people take the hydroxychloroquine?
No, I believe in evidence-based medicine, Dr. Ram.
Today there is
no evidence yet. I only know that all the adverse effects associated with hydroxychloroquine, and therefore one cannot recommend therapy blindly.
I know.
right? So our profession is based on the basic tenet, first do no harm. Therefore, one cannot recommend something that has the potential of harm, but no evidence for benefit.
The problem is there is no time for the evidence-based medicine for the COVID at this stage. That's the problem. So, like, animal trials are skipped. They're going to directly the human trials for the vaccine. Like, lot of bypass are happening in the COVID-related things. We don't understand. Nobody knows the answer. That's the problem. So we all jump and doing good for community. So I understand. We're all in a confused state only. But why I asked about the hydroxychloroquine, initial phase, we all took the hydroxychloroquine. All our doctors, my anesthetists, everybody took, because initial the idea why we are taking is so convincing for us. So we all took the hydroxychloroquine. So only I asked this question. Okay. Anything else you want to tell us here in this, because we all, like, Mayo Clinic is the highest standard in US, as well as we all see Mayo Clinic in that level only. So any other things you want to share, what we missed here to the Indians?
I think we have covered a lot. But the one thing that I will also, want to point out, and that not just for Indians, people everywhere, that to avoid stigmatization, people, in the healthcare industry, other service industries, they're all trying to help. The virus is not, race dependent, geography dependent, age dependent. It affects everyone. It is something that we are going through collectively. So to avoid people who are actually trying to help you and somehow stigmatize people, saying that you are Chinese, therefore you are responsible for this, and to attack such people, or doctors, nurses, all those people who are actually trying to help, take care of these people who you want to avoid, and not to hurt them by words, by physical actions, to be more part of the solution, not the problem. Don't create more problems, help each other out. And there are many ways, many opportunities right now. This is the situation where people's generosity should come out, people's compassion should come out, people's empathy should come out, and help the situation get better rather than making it worse. So that is the main thing that will help us all get through this. Everyone is afraid, whether they are doctors, whether they are nurses, whether they are janitors, whether they are the fruit stall vendors, or whoever. Everyone is trying to survive through this. So not to stigmatize anyone, not to attack anyone, don't spread misconceptions. It's not Chinese virus or Wuhan virus, it's coronavirus. It is a disease that affects everyone, whether you are a Russian, a Brazilian, an Indian, an American. Everyone is getting affected. So we should remember that if we all stick together with social distancing, we should be able to get through this. With it is going to require a lot of patience, a lot of compassion to be able to get through this.
Superb. Thank you so much, Dr. Deepti, and a lot of informations. And as a surgical person, my understanding about the medical thing is little less, but even I can understand the whole thing what you discussed in clear way, and it's clear to me. And thank you so much for your time. And we'll come up with a lot of other topics soon, and we'll discuss about it in this knowledge sharing area. And for you, good morning. For us, good night here. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it was my pleasure, Dr. Ram, talking to you. And hopefully the message reaches out to more and more people to spread awareness. Thank you so much.